So the next patch and season of the War Within is going to come with a massive change to the design of tier sets, and more specifically how the 2 set and 4 set interact and how the 2 set and 4 set are actually designed. And I think the biggest change of this is that all of the 2 set bonuses for every spec or class in the game are going to be designed by role instead of by spec. So healer, tank, range damage, and melee damage are all going to have somewhat similar 2 set bonuses. But then the 4 set bonus is still going to be designed by spec. And while just that explanation may just sound like they're being much more lazy, how they actually went about it has created some of the most interesting tier sets I think we've gotten in a while, and has added a completely new concept to World of Warcraft as a whole, but something that's used in a lot of other RPGs, this being keywords. So now there's going to be a keyword that is in both the 2 and 4 set bonuses that always does something kind of similar across all of the different tier sets. But when you get into the 4 sets that are spec specific, these new keywords have really interesting synergy with some elements of your spec. And first off, they give an example of one of these keywords, which is for ranged DPS, and they give an example through the Augmentation Evoker and Elemental Shaman. So for Aug Evoker, the 2 set is your damaging spells have a chance to hit a jackpot, jackpot being the keyword, causing an upheaval at 100% effectiveness that does not knock enemies up. Casting Breath of Eons always hits a jackpot. So just all of your damaging spells have a chance to cast this upheaval that doesn't knock enemies up, but just a normal upheaval, and then casting Breath of Eons always gives you that jackpot proc. And then for the Elemental Shaman 2 set, your spells and abilities have a chance to hit a jackpot, same as Aug Evoker, but for Shamans, this will summon a fire elemental for 8 seconds, and then casting Ascendance will also always hit a jackpot. And this is pretty similar across all of the different roles. They have something very similar for their 2 set to where there is a keyword that does something, proc something, but then depending on the spec you're playing, that keyword will affect different spells. So it still plays into the spec. It still is obviously using specific abilities from that spec. It's just the keyword and generally how you proc a keyword is the same across all of the different specs and classes. Now, what's also interesting to note with this is depending on what different spells it's using, it can still hook into and be affected by a bunch of your talent choices. So let's say Fire Elemental from Elemental Shaman, you could still go into different talent choices for your Fire Elemental that could give you other buffs, other effects, and have a much more important role in your general rotation. So it could be a lot more impactful depending on what spell is actually being procced. Now, as mentioned, the 4 set bonuses are still split by spec, but a lot of them are going to play back into the keyword that you get in your 2 set. Now, the 2 examples they give from the Augmentation Evoker and Elemental Shaman are some of the least interesting ones. So keep that in mind that while I think some of these are some of the most interesting tier sets we've gotten for years, some of them are still going to be boring. It's going to be hit or miss depending on class or spec, like all tier sets have been for the entire history of WoW. So for Augmentation Evoker, your upheavals have a 100% chance to grant Essence Burst, and eruptions cast with Essence Burst deal increased damage. So now the free upheavals you get from hitting jackpots will now always grant you Essence Burst, and then when you cast eruptions with that Essence Burst, they deal increased damage. So while this is still kind of boring, this will still probably have some impact on your rotation, and will also just be giving you a ton of probably pretty good feeling procs. And for Elemental, I think it's even more boring, but will still be very strong. When you summon or extend your Fire Elemental, your Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, and Lava Burst deal 10% increased damage for 8 seconds. So that one's pretty boring. You're going to be constantly getting jackpots to give you Fire Elementals. You can also just cast your Fire Elemental normally. This will give increased damage to a majority of your main rotation spells. So it's kind of boring, but it's still going to be really strong. And we did also get all of the tier sets released. So I want to go through and pick some of the most interesting ones and at least go through one of all of the different role types. So to start off, we have a Blood Death Knight. So this is going to have the keyword that is shared between all of the different tanks. So the 2 set is each time you take damage, you have a chance to activate Luck of the Draw, causing you to cast Icebound Fortitude for 4 seconds. So this is going to be the one that's very similar across all of the different tanks. Just taking damage, you have a chance to proc Luck of the Draw. That'll cast one of your big cooldowns and give it to you for 4 seconds. Keep in mind, this isn't taking away any of your cooldowns. This isn't causing a cooldown cooldown to be used when it randomly procs. This is just an additional chance to proc big cooldowns. You still have all of your normal cooldowns to use whenever you want. I've seen some people complaining about this like this is removing one of your cooldowns or something. This is just on top of everything else, and your damage is increased by 15% for 8 seconds after Luck of the Draw activates. So a pretty big damage increase as well. And depending on how often Luck of the Draw procs, you could get a damage increase for a majority of the time in combat. Then the 4 set is a Luck of the Draw, has a 2-second increased duration from 4 up to 6, which is massive for some big cooldowns. Also, really interesting with Blood Death Knight is its Icebound Fortitude breaks stuns. I'm also wondering how crazy that's going to be in PvP, because keep in mind, tier sets are still used in PvP. So in PvP, you could just be getting hit, get stunned, continuing to get hit, and it just procs an Icebound Fortitude, breaks you out, and gives you damage reduction. So that could be quite interesting. It'd obviously be much more interesting in Battlegrounds, which is where tanks are actually used in PvP. It'd still be pretty interesting in certain situations. And then, while Luck of the Draw is active, Death Strike costs 2 less runic power and can strike up to 2 additional nearby targets. Now, the 2 less runic power isn't very impactful. It will be over long durations, but Death Strike striking 2 additional targets is absolutely crazy, and presumably Death Strike is going to do the normal thing a Death Strike would do, which is heal you and give you shielding. And also Death Strike for Blood DKs right now, especially on single target, does a lot of damage. So now Death Strike cleaving is going to be ridiculously strong. And then you have all of the other talents that can feed back into Death Strike and do different things based off of your Death Strike that presumably will also be affected by these 2 additional Death Strikes. So this one actually sounds pretty crazy, and I think is starting to show a lot more of the interesting things that can happen with a keyword system. And next up, we're going to take a look at a Retribution Paladin, and melee DPS have the winning streak keyword. So your spells and abilities have a chance to activate a winning streak, increasing the damage of your Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm, which are your spenders, by 2% up to 10 times. So up to a 20% damage increase for your spenders is pretty big, but also Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm have a 12% chance to remove winning streak. Now, there is a few things I'm curious about. It does sound like the chance to remove will remove all stacks, and we don't know the chance to actually activate winning streak. So the chance to activate this could be really high, but what's generally going to be happening is you keep using your abilities, you stack up this damage, maybe you get up to like 4 stacks, then it gets removed when you use your ability again. You could stack it up fully, then it gets removed. So there is this kind of stacking and removal constantly going on. And I will say the winning streak as just a 2-set bonus for melee DPS, I think is the worst keyword so far, because every single one obviously is going to play the same way. Some of your main abilities stack this up, and some of your main abilities also have a chance to remove it. And I don't think that's going to feel particularly good as a 2-set bonus. It'll just generally be some damage increases, but it could also feel a little bit weird to play with. But then for the 4 set, when you lose your winning streak, you get the last holy power spent back, because keep in mind, Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm are holy power spenders. So you get that holy power spent back when one of those would remove your winning streak. And for 4 seconds, you cannot lose holy power, and the damage of your holy power abilities are increased by 10%. So if you don't play Retribution Paladin, this is absolutely absurd. First off, you get your holy power spent back, which is actually really crazy when mixed with now you don't lose holy power, because this is going to mean that you now have enough holy power to use on your spenders, but it's not going to use any of it for 4 seconds. So now you just have 4 seconds of spamming either one of your spenders, generally your highest damaging abilities. But not only is this really strong, it's really interesting because it plays really well into winning streak, because now you actually want to lose your winning streak. The thing from the 2 set that would normally be annoying to play with, now you want the annoying part to proc. So I think this is one of the examples of one of the best and most interesting versions of this new tier set experiment. And I play Retribution Paladin, and this sounds absolutely crazy. I know this will feel incredibly fun to play, especially if you're like in a Mythic Plus dungeon on a big pool. Getting this proc and just spamming 4 seconds of free Divine Storms will just give you some ungodly amount of burst and will be incredibly fun to play with. So next up, we have the healer keyword, which is insurance, and we have a Resto Shaman. Your healing spells have a chance to apply insurance to their targets that heals them over 15 seconds. Insurance is consumed if any ally drops below 40% health to heal them. So just any of your spells can apply another heal over time time to target, and if they drop below 40%, it procs the whole thing and just heals them up a bunch. And because this is a heal over time, I think this is probably going to have some pretty strong combinations with a lot of different elements of different classes. Depending on how strong this is and depending how it procs with other healers when you're specifically talking about being in raid, this may be kind of ridiculous because you could potentially have a part in a raid where you have insurance on the entirety of the raid across all of your healers, and then everybody takes a bunch of damage, goes below 40%, and they all get healed up a ton. So this could definitely be really strong. I could see this potentially being a balancing issue depending on how strong it ends up being. But then we have the 4-set bonus. When you cast Healing Rain, one ally in the radius has insurance applied to them. When insurance is consumed, your next chain heal, healing surge, or healing wave is increased by 10%. Now this one for Resto Shaman is a bit boring, but it's probably also going to play better or worse depending on your hero talents, because if you use Totemic, you just throw down your totem, you don't actually have to cast Healing Rain anymore. It's going to instantly put insurance on somebody. Also, just using Healing Rain and constantly proccing heals on somebody with it should also be able to apply insurance. So presumably Healing Rain is going to be applying a lot of insurance to a lot of different players, but I do think in general healers will probably be at least fine with insurance just because it's a bunch of additional healing that also helps with kind of the most stressful part of healing, which is when everybody gets low. So that'll just help you top people up a little bit. Healers will probably like this in general, even if it's just a pretty decent healing increase. Now, I did also want to go over one final spec just because the 4-set sounds so cool. So this is Guardian Druid. It has the same 2-set you'd expect. Each time you take damage, you have a chance to activate Luck of the Draw, which will cast a Survival Instinct for 4 seconds. Your damage is increased by 15% after Luck of the Draw activates. But the 4-set is just so cool for Guardian. After you gain Luck of the Draw, so just your random proc, your next 10 Druid abilities cast another Druid ability at 125% effectiveness, which is absolutely crazy. So just any of your abilities, just randomly cast another one at higher effectiveness than it would normally be cast at. So you may just do a swipe and it could cast another of any of your spells, but you could just swipe and it could cast another swipe just at higher damage. And that's your next 10 abilities. And also keep in mind, going through 10 abilities does take a bit of time. So it's going to actually take you a decent bit of time to go through all 10 of those procs. But depending on how often Luck of the Draw procs, you could just constantly have this up. And depending on how this Luck of the Draw proc actually works, it could proc more when you're getting hit by more targets. So maybe it'll end up procking a lot more in Mythic Plus. And at that point, this could even be up more of the time. So depending on how all of this actually procs, Guardian Druid could be absolutely crazy in Mythic Plus in Season 2. But that's the new experiment they're doing with tier sets in Season 2 of The War Within. I'm personally pretty excited about this. I was like most people when I first heard about this. I thought, well, they're probably just doing this because it's much easier and it's going to be super basic. But with them including these keywords and tying them in to the spec-specific 4 sets, a lot of these sets have ended up being very interesting. And I think on average, looking through all of these sets, they have on average been more interesting than a lot of tier sets we've gotten in the past couple of years. So I think on paper, this experiment has actually succeeded a bit. Now, I'm sure a lot of these tier sets will change in balancing and may even change in the effects they cause later down the road as we get closer and closer to Season 2. But what we've seen so far, I think has been pretty good overall. I also think it's really interesting adding keywords. Keywords are something heavily used in, say, Diablo-like games, Diablo, Path of Exile, Last Epoch. A lot of games like that really work off of keywords and pretty much everything is based upon that. So I do think it's really interesting adding in keywords, and I hope to see keywords used in other ways in the future of World of Warcraft. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.